Hi, everyone. Happy, God, what is this a Monday? Happy Monday. Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of our education live stream series. We've been doing this weekly now, just addressing different issues. It's put together by the Asian Community Development Council, and I come on to help moderate. So this is a great honor to do this to get the most pertinent information out there on the issues affecting different communities, but of course, especially the Asian American communities here in Nevada, with ACDC representing that and empowering that community here in Nevada. So today we're going to be talking about the U.S. Census. You've probably been hearing about that. Lots of campaigns out there for you to fill out the census, how important it is to fill out the census, why it's important, and why every person in the U.S. needs to be counted. So we're going to dig deep into that information and why it's so important that organizations like ACDC and their partners are really working hard to get the hard to count population. That is the challenge, getting everybody counted, and why it's so important to do that. So I am joined here today by a couple of special guests who are on the panel to join us to talk about this. First is we're going to hear from Eric Zhang. He's the Director of Outreach for the Asian Community Development Council. And also we have with us today Emily Zamora. She's the Executive Director of Silver State Voices. This is a 501c3 civic engagement table in Nevada. And of course, their main goal is to work with hard-to-count communities to make sure that they're counted in this census. So really great to have you on this live stream series. It's just been great to be able to create this conversation, especially on Facebook, to get people to ask questions. So the goal here, if you're watching this right now, jump on our Facebook comments. If you have any questions you want to direct to either Eric or Emily, they're here to answer it live. So definitely take advantage of that. And again, we're talking today about this census, right? And for people who don't know what this census is in the first place, you may be hearing about it, but it's definitely mandated by the Constitution. It's conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau. And the goal is every 10 years, they want to count everybody in the U.S. And the results of this determine where federal funding goes. That's very important. Also, a number of seats each state has in Congress. So we're going to talk more about this, but let me introduce you first to Eric. And Eric, you're the Outreach Director of ACDC. So talk to me a little bit about what you guys do as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization in order to get people counted and get people to fill out this census.
All right, so thanks again, Petrania. My name is Eric Zhang, and we're working for Outreach for Asian Community Development Council. So census, it's in our Constitution. Every 10 years, it has been done since the funding of our country to count the people in these United States. And it's important now that as time progresses that we want to make sure that not only it reflects how many people, but who are in our community. It's important. That's why we work closely with Emily and Silver State Voices to make sure that everyone gets counted. There's diversity, there's strength in numbers, and to help us know better how we serve our communities and making sure that the resources are not being, that we still have the resources needed for us to better our communities.
Yeah, and I know we especially work with ACDC. You guys reach out to Asian American community, and it's so important, especially in Nevada, just because of how fast this community is growing, right?
Yeah, correct. So I think a lot of time we give people numbers just to let them know how exciting the population growth, especially why the Asian and Pacific Islander community is the fastest growing communities here. And that comes from census. So right now I can, top of my head, Nevada is a state of about 3 million people. And out of that 3 million people, 11 to 12% are Asian Americans and Pacific Islander, totaling somewhere between 330,000 to 350,000. And more numbers I can throw out is out of that 330,000, half of them are Filipinos at 168, 169,000, followed by Chinese and Vietnamese, Korean, and we have a very big Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population. That's why we're the 9th island, but also South Asian, Southeast Asian, that also make this community the diverse place that it is, that you can just go down and find all the good food representing all different cultures. And that's how we get those numbers.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring Emily into the conversation here first to talk a little bit, and make sure your mic is on as well, to talk a little bit about what the census is even all about. I mean, obviously, we want to make sure that everyone is counted, especially those hard to count communities. But, tell me what it is. I mean, you answer a series of questions, and a lot of, there are people who are not as willing to answer because they're fearful of the confidential part, right? So address all that for us in terms of what's there in the census and what people need to know about why it's so important to answer this.
Of course. And thank you so much to ACDC for inviting me this evening. And the census is such an important conversation. As you said, there are so many individuals who are afraid of filling out the census because they're just not familiar with what it is. It is something that, as Eric said, it is required by our Constitution, but it happens only every 10 years. And I don't know about you, but I don't remember exactly what I was doing 10 years ago, right? And so, there's a lack of confidence and fearfulness in the process because it doesn't happen so often. And so, why does the census exist? It exists to have an accurate count of how many individuals are living in our country as of April 1st every 10 years. And so, as an institution, our country uses that for so many different reasons of having accurate data. But I think one thing that's very important is that the government can't use it against you for any type of reason, right? If you are of somebody who's undocumented, or you may have DACA, you cannot, that information cannot be given over to the Department of Homeland Security or any other type of institution. So I think that's something that's very important for our viewers to know. What are other things that are used for our data? So each state looks at the numbers, right, to really be able to see how many people are here and what types of people are here to use for funding for different programs. And we'll talk about this a lot more in depth as we continue on, but there are so many different programs that rely on census data and businesses as well to be able to determine how programs within our state, or if businesses should open in particular locations based on census data.
And I'm going to have Eric touch on that coming up in just a little bit, just because of the budget shortfall we're facing here in Nevada and why it's so important. But you brought up the whole, confidentiality of the census. And I just want to address one of the questions we're already getting here on Facebook Live. Someone just asked, does the census this year ask about citizenship? So can you ask about it? Because that's a big fear, right? People who are undocumented maybe don't want, or they have family members or friends who are, they don't want to fill it out, fearing that the government will know their status. But you can talk about that. It actually does not include that question on the census.
Yes, and that's correct. It does. In the 2020 census, there is not a question that asks about your citizenship status. The reason why there may be this narrative that exists is that in 2019, the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, that is the person who oversees the Census Bureau nationally, he, per President Trump, requested that a question be put in about citizenship. Now, we're very lucky that they were not successful, and this went all the way to court, the highest level of court, and it was found that this question could not be added for a multitude of different reasons. But at this moment, there is not a question in the 2020 census. One thing that I do want to be clear is that the 2020 census is one questionnaire that the Census Bureau does do. But on a yearly basis, there are other types of questionnaires that the Census Bureau does. One is the ACS, and on that questionnaire, it does have a question about citizenship. So you might have gotten something from the Census Bureau last year, and it might have asked you that. Even in that sense, the Census Bureau cannot give your information over to any type of governmental agency. So if you have DACA, if you're undocumented, or if you're here on a visa, you can fill out the census and feel that your information will not be given to DHS or any other types of governmental agencies.
Okay, so let's talk about why, we're talking about why it's so important. We kind of touched on that. And I want Eric to come back in here and talk about Nevada, especially because a lot of people watching here may be living in Northern Nevada or Southern Nevada, and just, wanting to understand why it is so important for them, personally to fill out this form because of the funding that comes in. And I think this has a lot to do with COVID-19, right? What we're dealing with right now has really depleted the state resources in many ways. So Eric, talk to us about that, because you've been following the special session that's happening right now that's addressing that very issue, right?
Yeah, so this is right now we're hearing the special session is going on right now in Carson City, and the governor asked the legislators to kind of approve the cost reduction measures that's been taken. So what we're hearing is the fiscal year 2021, Nevada, normally the revenue is about $4.5 billion, and that $4.5 billion has a shortfall about $1.3 billion. So that's one third of our state budget that goes to essential services like healthcare, like education. That's just not going to be there because it's our state relies on tourism, our state relies on the convention, on the resorts, on gaming, and those are the shortfall that we're seeing right now. So that means the two kind of the public services that we're looking. One side is from state revenue, from the other side is the federal funding part, which on the screen I shared counting for dollars from Nevada. So out of the other part that we rely on federal funding, you can see this is a chart of using 2016's numbers. The public services that we're looking on one side. Oh, okay. Sorry, and $6.2 billion that we're looking are from the federal government. So 55 large federal spending programs. Out of this, you probably saw ads somewhere put up by the Nevada Census push is $3.3 billion goes to healthcare. You can see the biggest one, Medicaid, Medicare Part B. A lot of it goes into funding these programs. And the kind of the jarring stats that we have right now is in Nevada, right now, 1 in 4 Nevadans are on Medicaid just because of the economic and job crisis that we're facing. And then another 1.1 billion, you can see it through here, going to a lot of schools, Title I schools, going to the school lunch and school breakfast programs. I always love saying this. I will keep on repeating. The last special session, we give Raiders $750 million to the stadium. And when they announced their full move here, I think earlier this year, pre-COVID, they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna give $150,000 for school lunches. And then I remember they got so much press, like, oh yeah, they're investing in communities. The federal government every year pour in for the school lunch programs and for the breakfast programs is about 100 times of that. So for us as Nevadans, if we want to help out the community in general, just make sure you fill the census, not only for yourself, for your family. Make sure you reach out to your relatives, to your neighbors, checking on people to make sure that they fill this out. Because for everyone that's not counted, just by doing simple math here, 6.2 billion with a 3 million state, is every year we stand to lose $2,000 per person. The long-term effect, $20,000 per person not filled out. So just an estimate, if in 2010 we were undercounted between 45,000 to 55,000, that's a projection. that 50,000 translated to a loss of $1 billion in revenue for the last 10 years. So if I appeal for your civic duty, next I'm going to appeal for that pocketbook, right? Mm-hmm. That is long-term investment. When you see highways, right now 215 are getting one more lane. Those from the money from census, where there's allocation for highway planning and construction to DOT, that 350 million. The neon, the spaghetti bowl, that's census money. A lot of things, I can keep going on. The downtown, people are like, how about, does it address homelessness? The downtown Catholic Charities campus that was built, that was from the community CDBG entitlement grants. You see the HUD over here, $17 million. That goes to all the different homeless facilities that we have, the soup kitchen, the Lutheran services, and Salvation Army. All this large, or even from United Way, all these large charities that we think that serve a lot of our homeless population comes from the CDBG grants. Of course, all the public housing for affordable housing, that's also from census. So everything, if you mention some issues that's needed, if you're like, oh, how about crime prevention? How about gun violence? A lot of the CDBG money also goes to the schools that's most at risk, neighborhood that's most at risk, to build programs. So yeah, so I can go on. If you raise any issue for conservation, for that we can, for clean energy, we can all tie it back to census.
Well, I think this is really important because I know it's a lot of numbers, for people to take in, but I think it's so important because if you don't break it down to see how much federal money we get into the state each year and what it does to make a difference in all our lives, then it doesn't really hit people, right? Because as you say, money talks. Now, yes, money is important, but to get that to come in, we need to be counted, especially different communities. And I know, Emily, we want to talk about hard to count communities and the issue with that. And you have some numbers yourself that you've been looking through in how many people have responded so far and what communities. And you can see that. And what's kind of the problem here, I think, with many communities across the country is that when it comes to communities that really need to be counted, need to be empowered, and need the funding, they're the ones that probably are undercounted. Is that correct?
That's definitely correct. And so right now, nationwide, the count for the census is 62%.
These are the self-response rate, people who've gone and actively filled this out online or call, right?
Yes. And so that's that people themselves have either filled out the form that they got in the mail, have called over the hotlines, or have gone onto 2020census.gov and have filled it out. Mm-hmm. In the state of Nevada, we're currently at a self-response rate of 61.2%. And so we're pretty much almost there at the national average. We rank 28th in the nation. So I think there's still a lot of room for us in Nevada. And one thing that's really lucky, an opportunity that we have at Silver State Voices, since we work very closely with the governor's team that's dedicated to ensuring that we have an accurate census count, and they're able to, with the state demographer, provide information around where we're doing, how we're doing on particular zip codes, right, of self-response rates. And there's a couple that I really want to highlight here. So, for example, 89169. That is right where Sunrise Hospital is, and right around the corner from UNLV. So currently, that as of June 15th, that zip code was only at a 41% response rate. We have 89101, which is really in the downtown area. That area, as of June 15th, was at a 45% rate. 89119, that is actually where our office as Silver State Voices is, was at a 47% rate, and 89115, excuse me,
You can grab some water if you need. Eric, I know you pull up this map for me as she's drinking some water. Do you guys look at this too at ACDC in terms of like looking at response? Because that's how we reach out in the community with your organization as well, correct?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, so this is the map, and Emily, if you're okay, we'll get you back here because yeah, I think it's really interesting. And Eric, you look at this map too, right? And do we kind of look and what does this tell us about which community is responding, and how do we work with these numbers, Eric?
So for us, a big thing that we're looking at is defining the hard to count communities.
Yeah.
Like Emily mentioned, and one of it is I look at reverse when Emily shared the list.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the highest one are places like Henderson, places like Sun City, Anthem, places where you have kind of more stable housing for folks that's lived there for a long time, for more like retirees, and to be frank, like more white people that they're there, and they have been. It's kind of the same metrics of people, the same people who like consistently show up to vote. But then you can see the places that needs a lot more push, or folks where the hardest population that's not counted are 0 to 5 years old. So where new families are, where new Americans, like new immigrant families are, or people that have a language barrier. So for us too, as I want to share that this is all the different languages that the Census Bureau provides. All the big ones with logo are the ones that you can actually call or do the website. You can do it in those languages. And then all the little ones are like reference guides. So they have language guide from, the 2 different types of Chinese, or all the different languages, including, from like Yiddish, Vietnamese, Urdu, to like Navajo, to Malaysian, Malayalam, to Lao, to languages that folks can use it as a reference guide too.
Yeah, and I think that is part of the whole access, and we want to bring Emily back in now. Are you okay? We just wanted you to address this, especially when it comes to different languages that Eric was talking about. That is one of the issue, right? For the immigrant communities, a lot of them either fearful because they don't understand the process, they don't know the language, they feel like they don't have the correct information to fill out this census in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the Census Bureau has done a lot of work in the last 10 years to be able to make the census a lot more accessible for our communities. And so once upon a time, you could only fill out the census in English. And then in 2010, you could fill it out in English and Spanish. And as of today, you can fill it out in 13 different languages. And many of them are API languages. You could fill it out in Mandarin, you could fill it out in Vietnamese, in Tagalog, and several other API languages. And that is something that you can do online or over the phone. And I think that's amazing because it shows the power and the strength of those communities. And it's made the Census Bureau recognize that these communities are here, and it recognizes that we have to make this more accessible for these communities.
Yeah, for sure. And then actually I wanted to Eric to show us the video, because you showed us a video earlier that is helping to get through to the Asian American community, right? And I think we've seen quite a number of these campaigns out there in order to kind of reach different communities. But with the Asian American community in particular, you said that there's a video that's out there that's really trying to get attention.
Yeah, so the video that I'm showing is the one with English with caption, but I think they also made it in 20, 30 different Asian languages too. So this is the one. Let's see if I can play it.
Okay. Pull that up.
Every 10 years, the U.S. Census Bureau counts everyone living in the United States. People like Mr. Lee. It doesn't matter whether they are students, service members, renters, employees, have green cards, work visas, are undocumented, have lived here a long time, or moved here recently, or temporarily. Regardless of their age, height, income, or ethnicities, they all count. Over the last 20 years, AAPIs have been the fastest growing group among the overall U.S. population. However, together, we still only make up about 7% of the total U.S. population. So missing a few counts is a big deal. It affects families and communities a lot more than you might think. If we are not accurately reflected in the census data, our communities won't get what they need when it comes to government representation and public funding. Maybe we won't get that community health center we've always been talking about. Or maybe our students will get less financial aid for their education. Or maybe we end up losing a seat in Congress that represents our own communities. By participating in the census, we won't be left out. We can show everyone in this country that AAPIs won't conform to the stereotypes of staying silent and fading into the background. We can define our own story and let people know AAPIs are not all the same. We all have unique stories that are a part of this great nation. We need to be counted, recognized as a community, to have our say in how over $1.5 trillion a year in public funding is distributed for hospitals, schools, and roads for the next generation and beyond. Starting April 1st, it's time to do your part. Fill out the census.
All right. So that video, tell us again, Eric, well, who created that and what's kind of the goal of getting this information out there?
So making sure, hold on, all right. So the goal is this is from one of our national partner, API Vote. We also worked with them last summer to have workshops remember the times that people could still be together for workshops. So we hosted work with them for 2 different workshops to talk about how to get census into the community. If you go online to go to YouTube for API Vote Census, you can see all that video in all different languages. So for example, I grew up in Taiwan, so there's a Taiwanese one, there's a Cantonese one, there's a Mandarin one. So it's very accessible for folks to use that for their community outreach. And then, oh, sorry, I have another one that
go ahead.
And this one is, 1 second. This one, I am in the video, so I just want to. Hold on. So this one I can actually share too. And some of you all might have already seen it. This was targeted specifically for people here in Nevada. Okay. So this is the one. Share. Look at the kids playing puzzles. All right, let's start. 30 minutes ahead.
嗨，内华达州的大家好。我们今天要讲的是2020年的人口普查多么重要。每10年一次的人口普查，确保我们亚洲人，不管是华人，不管你是什么，从哪里来，都有办法得到联邦的资源与补助。这10年的经费会包括教育、包括健康、包括社区的发展，需要您被算进这个人口普查里面。少于10分钟，花这个10分钟，确保未来10年的预算。谢谢大家。
All right. So now you translate for us what you just said.
It's basically what we just said.
But in Taiwanese.
Yeah, and less than in Mandarin, less than 10 minutes to fill the census out.
Very
and
good.
Making sure that that we can have a future for the next decade.
And are we targeting these videos out to the communities, like that the Taiwanese community, the Chinese community, so that it gets right to the target?
So you can see the logo Nevadans Count. That's a coalition with Emily's leadership, and I believe we were able to target Chinese-speaking audiences within the state of Nevada to boost that video. So if you speak Chinese, you might have seen that face already. And I wear one outfit. That's just
No, that's great. And, we're going to get Emily back in here in a few, but she speaks Spanish. So she's reaching out to people in that community as well. But first, before we get there, I just wanted to re-welcome people who are watching us on Facebook Live right now. Just clicked on not too long ago. This is our education live stream series talking about the issue of the U.S. Census. Of course, this is the big deal this year. Once every 10 years, the U.S. Census Bureau is attempting to count every single person in the United States. And this is so important because this dictates how much federal funding each community gets, including right here in Southern Nevada, where we're at, and across the country as well. And we're talking today just about just the challenge of getting everybody to fill it out, especially right now with the COVID-19 pandemic happening. Usually there are different events that are, groups like ACDC puts on to get people the information they need to fill out the census. But because right now we're all kind of had to stay at our home most of the time, we're trying to get the information out there for you on avenues like this. So we're actually getting some answers, some questions coming in from people watching, and I'm going to get Emily into the conversation here to answer one of the questions that we have. It's asking, should families count all the kids in their household, even if they're babies or they live with other family members? So can you address this for us?
Yes, I can. This is an excellent question, and one that we get very frequently. I'm not sure, Petrania, if you knew, but the most undercounted demographic in the 2010 census was children between the ages of 0 to 5. And the question is so critical. And the answer is yes, 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 yes. If you have a child who was born on April 1st, 2020 or before, they should be counted in your census. If they were born after April 2nd, 2020, or you had a baby yesterday or whatever, then they would not be counted in the census because the information is based on April 1st. That's why April 1st is Census Day. But yes, if you have a child, I have a household of 6 people and one animal. And in my census, I did count my 5-year-old son. My dog, Magenta, was not on my census. But, all of the 6 humans were counted in my census. So it is really, really important. And there are so many programs actually that, in my opinion, are underfunded within our state because parents don't count their children. Programs like WIC, like Head Start, like the school lunch program, those are all funded based on census data. So integral to children between the ages of 0 to 5 years of age. And so if the child lives in your household, even if they're not your child, if they're a grandchild, a niece or nephew, but they live in your household, you should count them.
What if you have a child, but they live with another household? So that other household counts the child, not you, correct?
So say that you are, divorced family, right? And the child goes back and forth between mom and dad. Well, they need to be counted in the household that is their primary caregiver. So you would need to ensure that you don't double count them and you count them in the household that's the primary caregiver.
Okay. And then, Emily, we have another question. If you want to address this, we actually got this one in Tagalog and our team actually translated it for us. And they're saying, why is the census important for high school students like me? So we're having some high school students watching right now, and they want to know, obviously 10 years ago, they're really very young, so this is the first time but it's going to impact them for the next 10 years, correct?
Yeah. And it's so exciting to see that high school students are watching this and becoming educated. I think one of the biggest things that I think it's in 3rd place in the state of Nevada for the program that receives the most funding based on census data is that of federal aid being for grants for higher education. So your FAFSA money, if you go to UNLV or CSN or Nevada State College or UNR and you receive your money from FAFSA, that was given to you based on census data. And it's something that, I've been in this world for a long time, and I was listening to Africa, and I had no idea about, so I educated on the census. And so that is one of the programs that I would recommend, as a high school student, that you should fill out the census because of that.
Okay, very good. And, I know people are looking information coming on this Facebook Live, so just wanted to put in there, and maybe our team can put it on the comments too, that if you want more information, you can go to 2020census.gov. If you want information for links leading to the different languages that they're getting help, you can also go to countusin2020.org, www.countusin2020.org. And this is the language hotline that you can call as well at 1-844-2020-API, and you get assistance in a number of languages. So we're going to try to put it on the screen for you so that you have all those information handy. But this is basically all the way that the Census Bureau and different partners, different organizations, including Silver State Voices and the Asian Community Development Council, are trying to do, and trying to get people who maybe are in hard to count communities to get them counted. And Eric, I want to bring you in here because I know ACDC has been instrumental in organizing different events to get people counted in the census. And one of them is the Asian Night Market. So talk to us about that and just kind of the changes that we're seeing this year because of COVID-19.
Yeah, so not sure how many people watching this actually heard about or attended the Asian Night Market that ACDC and the last 2 years with OCA, Las Vegas chapter, put up. So it was in the southwest part of town. I remember we used the Dignity Hospital at Warm Spring, where the first year we had about 6,000 people. Second year we broke 10,000 folks. And a lot of time when I was walking around, people told me, like, we know that Asian community are growing, but we've never been in a place that we actually feel like everyone came out to one event. So we were really proud of that. Of course, that kind of event, it's hard to imagine putting on now, but those are the times that a lot of community members tell us that, one, they feel the pride, they feel like they're part of the community, and we got to showcase local talents, local entrepreneurs, local good food, food truck and restaurants. But it's also, we want that to translate into the stats, what we see for the census numbers. So we want to, for ACDC, for a group like us, our founder and president, Vida, who also had her birthday yesterday, happy birthday to Vida, mentioned that she started this because after the 2010 census, there's such a need of making sure that the Asian and Pacific Islander communities have a resource hub, have an advocate because of the 2010 census results. We saw the population growth was 167%. Nevada is one of the fastest growing states. Clark County is top 5 in the county net population growth, and the Asian and Pacific Islanders are the fastest growing minorities, both in-state and nationwide. So you merge all those stats together, that kind of propelled us into who we are right now. We found out that in Clark County, there's 90,000 people that were foreign born that are becoming new Americans. That's why we have a citizenship assistance program. We found out that more and more people are using Medicaid or the Nevada Health Link for the exchange without, we know that there's more and more folks with that would benefit from our language assistant. That's why we have health navigators. We know that someone said with high school students, Emily already mentioned, but Pell Grant, the Pell Grant money going to every state, that's allocated by the census numbers as well. So we have college readiness boot camp because we know there's a lot of Asian Pacific Islander students that are going to college but still need more resources. So these all connected back to census, and that's why we found out that we have 330,000 Asian Pacific Islander families here. By that, about 200,000 people should be the citizens of voting age population above 18. That's why Emily and us, well, all of us runs a large voter registration program because we know the number is there. but then we know the people that showed up, there's still a gap. So I think why is it so crucial to ACDC's mission of educate, connect, and empower? It goes back to census getting counted. The first step is getting counted to know the population, to know the needs. And then the next step is making sure that people's voices are heard through the resources that we're doing, serving families, to advocating for better education and better election processes to help make sure people's voices are heard. So kind of all mixed together into it's like my grand theory of everything for sense.
No, it's great. And you know what? I actually was so looking forward to go to the Asian night market this year because I've never been to one. I actually moved back into town not too long ago, and I've heard how great this event was. And I know it's not happening this year because of COVID-19, but I know Eric and his team at ACDC, you're really trying to get the word out there otherwise, because that was kind of the vehicle. And I know, Emily, you are part of the statewide complete count committee, so you're doing your part as well to get the word out. So talk to us a little bit of the process of how easy it is to fill out the census, because that's what you're trying to kind of ingrain into people's, that, hey, this is a really easy process. You just have to get online or get on the phone and fill this out, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 different ways to fill out the census. And this is the first census ever that we have all 3 different options. And so you can fill it out by the traditional way. Many people received it via mail, and it's a paper form. And you can fill it out that way. Or option number 2 is filling it out online. You can go to 2020census.gov and fill it out that way. And there's multiple different languages that you can fill it out in. You know, I am fluent in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and I was just playing with it to see like how accurate the translations were. And they're actually pretty good. So good, kudos to the Census Bureau. And so if you want to, you feel more familiar online, you can fill it out that way. Or last but definitely not least, there are different hotlines. And so you can get connected to a census agent and fill it out over the phone with a census agent. You know, one thing that I do advise folks is that for most people, you should have received a census ID number, so a paper that said what your census ID is. If you haven't, that makes things a little bit easier. So, you know, make sure you grab it and have it while you fill it out. If you don't have it, maybe you threw it away or never got it in the mail, that's fine. You can still fill out the census that way.
And we actually, yeah, I think we just got a question here that is pertinent to what you're saying. It's actually asking, when is the last day to fill out the census? Because I know this year they extended the deadline, right? Because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, and that is exactly correct. It was supposed to be in July, but self-response has now been extended to one of my favorite days of the year, Halloween, October 31st. So you can make it a treat and fill out your census on Halloween day, the last day.
hopefully before, right? So talk to us a little bit about that, because if you don't fill out by a certain time, I think starting next month, you could get a knock on the door from someone to say, hey, fill out your census.
Yes, and so what the Census Bureau does is that once they've hit a certain threshold, they have people, not who they call enumerators, knocking on your door. If you haven't filled out your census yet, to advise you, hey, you haven't filled it out, please fill it out. And so, you know, I know right now there's a lot of concerns around COVID, and they are definitely taking all of the right procedures to ensure that their folks are ready. That whole process will start in the next couple of weeks, but it definitely goes a lot more in depth after Halloween. And so it's really, really critical that folks just go ahead. It takes less than 10 minutes to fill it out. And that way you're not risking an enumerator knocking on your door, and you're not risking not being counted on the census. One thing I do want to say is that if for some reason you forget to fill it out, an enumerator knocks on your door, they do have an ID badge that has their badge number on it. So if you feel, maybe feels a little bit sketchy or anything, they do have that, and they do have actual official, like there's a bag that they wear that identifies them. And you can call the Census Bureau and say, hey, I've had somebody knock on my door with this badge number. I want to confirm that they are actually an enumerator.
And that's why I think it's so important to really fill it out if you can before that happens, before somebody comes knocking, right? And and Eric, I did it, and I did it online actually, and it took me less than 10 minutes to do so. So it's super easy, and I recommend people doing it that way. But again, you can do it, especially if you need language assistance and all that. And Eric, I know that ACDC, we have people on hand to answer, these questions and kind of address any concerns, especially from the Asian American community. And you've done your census, right? You fill out your census? I'm just calling you out. I hope you did.
Yep, this is the first weekend that we can do. Yep, and that's the thing about living by myself. It's 9 questions. I took 3-4 minutes to get it done. But I also want to shout out. I was just a couple weeks ago, I was doing one of the event where we're doing meal distribution with the Ninth Island aunties. So this is a great group of Hawaiian aunties, and they pack food together to give out. And right now they're using the census bag to give
oh, nice.
Food. And we're doing this with social distance and mask and gloves. We're doing a lot of this packaging at the Two Scoops Aloha right by the airport. And I think the owner auntie just came by and said, why is census important? So I did the same spiel, and then she actually was able to fill out her census right then, right there. So I just want to give a shout out to Two Scoops Aloha. If anyone in this 110-degree weather wants some shave ice, that's a good place to go and check out.
That sounds great. Yeah.
So, and so with the census ID, of course, it's faster, but it's not a barrier. If you don't have it, she just type in her address and was able to just connect and fill it out under 5 minutes.
Yeah. And I think these personal stories really help people who are coming out to support this. And Emily, you've been out there talking to different people. Any kind of personal story on your end on why, the kind of efforts that are out there, or why it's so important for the families and friends, of people to really do this and fill out the census?
I think we've heard a lot of different stories and of different reasons, but I think, I can share with, within my family, this is honestly the first time that I can tell you that we have filled it out. I think, one of the things, my husband, I've been married now for 8 years, but my husband was undocumented in the last census, and he didn't fill it out because he thought that that because he wasn't of U.S. citizenship status, that it didn't pertain to him. And I've heard that story so many different times with so many different families. So, this is the first census that we're filling it out, and I'm really excited to know that we're going to be part of that complete count.
And I think that's the key point to make too, is that people who are undocumented should fill it out because they live here in this country, right? So that's kind of the key thing.
Yes, that's definitely the case. This is your country, right? And this is where you call home, and you should be reflected in the numbers. Petrania, I've been working in civic engagement for so long, and one of the things that I've been saying around the census is that there are so many different types of civic engagement that folks who are not U.S. citizens cannot participate in, right? Like voting, for example, you have to be a U.S. citizen to do that. But this is one type of civic engagement that you can just do regardless of your status, right? And I think that's it's an excellent way to get our communities who may not be, may have different statuses to participate.
Yeah. That's important information. And then since I have you, Emily, here, if you don't mind answering the next question we just got on Facebook, and a student is asking, should student fill out their census with their campus address or their home address. And I'm thinking these are college students, right? Or where they're staying at the time.
Yes. Yeah. So this is actually a really good question because life is complicated right now. You know, you may be at home when you normally are in a dorm or in your college apartment or whatever, you know, your normal living situation is, but things are different right now because we're experiencing a pandemic. And so my response and what we have verified with the Census Bureau is that if you would normally be living in your dorm or, you know, your college apartment or whatever other housing that you normally would have had on April 1st, pretending that the pandemic was not happening, fill it out at that particular address. So if you are, you know, right now I'm in Carson City, 30 minutes away from UNR. If you're normally somebody who lives in the UNR dorms, and you would have, if the pandemic would have happened, fill it out with that address. It's really important to know those numbers.
Okay, so we have about less than 10 minutes to go here. I want to kind of give you both a platform to kind of address any questions we haven't or issues we have not reached out. I actually got another question. We'll see if Eric wants to address this one. It's translated from a Tagalog person, a speaking person, and they're asking, how can I ensure that my answers and my personal information are protected? And I think both Eric and Emily have talked about this, of how it's actually illegal for them to release any of your personal information. Correct, Eric?
Yes, that is correct. And then everyone at the Census Bureau, from the enumerator all the way up top, they have taken a lifetime oath to protect personal information, personal data. The Census Bureau uses other data from other agencies to help determine, but it's an import only, no export. So for example, a lot of folks, I think we addressed this too. You know that people with bad intentions in ICE will want to get some of those citizenship data. Census Bureau legally cannot do that, cannot share their data to any other agencies. So,
and this includes law enforcement. They can't give it to police. They can't give it to ICE. They can't give it to anybody, correct?
Not your local enforcement, not FBI, and definitely not ICE. So not only the lifetime oath for the Census Bureau staffers, the penalty is up to $250,000 or 5 years in prison, and that is how serious they're taken for the protection, the confidentiality of the census part.
Yeah, and I would just add to that the Census Bureau is not able to release information on census per every 10 years until I believe it's 70 years later per the Constitution. And so even it with all of these protections, what comes out for the 2020 census, the Census Bureau won't be able to make it public until 2090.
Yeah.
So we have a long ways to go until they can make any of the information public.
All right. So any last word from you, Emily? Any information you want to get out there for people who are watching right now and just wanted to get that confirmation that this is what they need to do, is to fill out their census as soon as possible?
Yeah, there's still, as I said earlier, we're at 61.2%. So there's still over 30, almost 40%, 38% of the population in the state of Nevada that has not filled out their census. And so now more than ever, the Census Bureau has made it easy to fill out the census. Either fill it out in the form that you receive in the mail, going online to 2020census.gov, or calling the different hotlines. And there are multiple different languages, whether it's English or Espanol or Portuguese, or, in Tagalog or in Chinese. I'm not fluent in either one of those languages, so I can't tell you how to. But, there's so many different ways that you can fill it out, and it's easy. Something that I think is important to uplift is that the importance of filling it out completely. One thing that is new and that we actually found out about in the last couple of weeks is that if you're turning in your census and it's not complete, then you actually might get a phone call from the Census Bureau trying to confirm your form, that your census form, and ask about the questions that you hadn't. And so this is something that hasn't really happened before. And to avoid receiving any of those phone calls, it's really critical that you fill out your form completely. You know, as residents of Nevada, it's so important that our government knows that we're here, because that's how they advocate for us. You know, Eric talked about the different programs, but besides that, you know, in 2021, we're going to be experiencing redistricting, and that's how we know. That's how we know how many people live in each district and how we create our districts, you know, whether it's our congressional districts or state senate or state assembly. And so for us to receive the representation that we need to have, it's so critical that we fill out the census.
Yeah, very true. And Eric, I'm going to let you close it out here. Anything you want to say about especially what ACDC is trying to do to get people to be represented here in the census?
Yeah, so definitely at this point, if you haven't filled it out, make sure you fill it out. But now it's more to the second degree, third degree. So like I said, when I go to restaurants, I mention it. There's so many ways to tag things back to census. And for high school, you know, any high school student, college students in Nevada, the Pell Grant for a student loan, that's $129 million a year allocated to us because of census. You know, that you can, 129 million, you can buy like 20 books, 20 textbooks out of that money. So that for us too is an important project that we work with, especially like College Readiness Boot Camp, to make sure resources are bringing back to the communities. So yeah, so make sure not only you do it, be a little missionary for census, especially everyone's quarantined at home. It's a perfect time to spend a couple of minutes and then make sure that our community's future, the next 10 years, can be there and have the resources that we need, have the infrastructure that we need, protect on healthcare, on education, and the community development that we so care about.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Eric, again, and also Emily as well for joining us today. And if you've been watching, we've been talking about the U.S. Census, the importance of doing this. And I'm joined by, of course, Eric Zheng with Director of Outreach for ACDC. You can find more information on them. Go to the website, acdcnv.org, and Emily Zamora with Executive Director of Silver State Voices. And you're also part of the statewide Complete Count Committee. So you guys are doing great work to get the word out there for people to fill out their census. I did it. Emily did it. Eric did it. It's so easy to do. Just take that little effort that could mean a big financial difference over the next 10 years, especially for the state of Nevada. So again, if you've been watching, thank you so much for joining us here on our Facebook Live. Join us again as we touch on another important topic. Maybe Emily and Eric will come join us on one of the future panels. And but yeah, thank you so much for watching, and we hope you have a great day and stay safe out there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fill the census so my puppy can have dog parks.